Heyo everybody, Haku here with my first review for Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, or just Omniscient Reader. I mean, the official translation just calls it Omniscient Reader. But this is going to be for the web comic, the manhwa adaptation of the web novel. So yeah, just what I've been reading on the channel, but since it's the first one, I definitely felt the need to specify. These reviews are going to be on the web comic. Yeah, before I get into reviewing, before I get into going through each chapter in depth, there is kind of some intro stuff since this is the first video to talk about, kind of just basic structural stuff for how these videos are going to work. But this first one's going to be on the prologue and the first chapter, which is the beginning of the paywall. So the prologue's going to be chapters 0 and 1, the prologue and the prologue before the prologue, and the beginning of the paywall is chapters 2 through 6. So that's what we're going to be handling for this video. So yeah, I actually, if you've been following along with my sort of community tab posts and everything, I recorded this entire video. It was 25 minutes long. I edited it. I did everything for it. But I didn't post it because I wasn't happy with it. I thought that I skimmed over things a little bit too much that I should have spent some more time talking about, that I just kind of went too fast with it all. So I was like, okay, you know what? I don't feel comfortable posting this. I want to do a better job with it, so I'm going to re-record the entire thing from scratch. So that's what this is. There's already been sort of a rough draft version of this video made, but I wasn't happy with it, so I'm doing the entire video again from scratch. And that's what you're seeing here. Also, I want to say, I think it was when I did the Kubera review, it was Elsa, I believe, who said that it would be helpful to put in the chapters for like which chapter I'm talking about as I'm talking about it across the bottom. So you can go and see I'm going to put video chapters on this in every review from now on, because I was like, it's kind of weird if you're going to like, why would you be skipping to like chapter 2? Like, why wouldn't you be watching the entire video? But she said it would be helpful, like if you're going back to refer to something, to be like, okay, which chapter is he talking about with this one? Oh, 3, I need to go to chapter 3 to see what he's talking about. Like if I refer to something and you need to go check what it is that I'm referring to. So yeah, I'm going to be adding chapters for all the reviews from now on. And I guess that's basically it. Let's just talk about things starting from the prologue. So I will say before I start though that the way I'm doing this, I went through all of these chapters. I took in-depth detailed notes on all of them, and I'm just going to talk about the chapters in depth through those notes. But if there is some sort of afterword or blog post type thing like we have for Tower of God or for Kubera, I could not find it. If there is something like that, I couldn't find it. Because whenever I tried to look at it, all the information I could ever find was for the web novel, and I was also trying really, really hard to not spoil myself on anything, so I eventually just had to be like, I'm having trouble finding information on stuff that isn't the web novel, and I also don't want to be spoiled. I can't find if anything like that exists, so if it does, sorry, it's not included in this review. But either way, let's just start from the beginning. Let's talk about episode 0, which is where we get our first mention of 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, which is just going to be much easier to refer to as TWSA. We see that it has a total of 3,149 episodes. The average views are 1.9, the average comments are 1.08, and Dokja says that it even took him 10 years to read, so it is a commitment. And we get some glimpses of the story, and we have Dokja seemingly fighting, I believe his name is Yoo Jung-hyuk, the main character for TWSA. I think that's what's going on here. And we have 9 characters at the very end of the prologue to the prologue. Then I'm like, okay, is this going to be our main character party? Or are these just going to be 9 important characters, but they're not necessarily aligned? But yeah, just what I'm getting from this intro. I don't think it's quite like, because I just reviewed Kubera, there's a lot of information in this series, but I actually don't think we get into the deeper, heavy information until like, well, it's different, because Kubera, it feels like we just get so much dense information right at the very, very beginning, where with Omniscient Reader, it's like, we do get information here, but I feel like we get tons of information in the next section. And then we get even more in the section after that. I feel like it's a slower unraveling of big information drops. And the stuff at the very beginning is just kind of setting up the premise, and like it's not even until the next section before we get into like the really deep stuff to me. But either way, let's start off with episode 1, which is probably my sort of densest section of notes. It was a pretty long one. So one thing that's mentioned with TWSA is there are 3 ways to survive, but if you're reading this, you will survive. And that's from TLS 123. Somebody in the comments explained that if you type TLS using like Korean sort of typing, it goes to the character for God, so it's God 123. I do think TLS 123, they're the ones who wrote this. They have had the communication of sending the thing to Dokja, so I feel like they've got to be a strong, important character force. I feel like it's going to be important to remember them like as a character. I don't know if it's going to be one of those things where it's like they just set things into motion and then they're like absent for the rest of the story. I think they're actually going to be a part of the story in some way, but who knows. So we get Dokja's explanation that his name means only child, a reader, or individualist, and his father named him that so that he would grow up strong. And that's a horrible reason to give your kid a name. And even the next thing that Dokja says is basically that he's been lonely and single his entire life. So yeah, Dokja's dad, this didn't work out. This wasn't a good idea. He's 28 years old. He's a graduate of a third-rate college, and he's a contractor, which from what his conversation with Sanga, we can sort of gather that it's just because he isn't like a full-time employee. He just works contract to contract. Then he says his hobby is reading web novels on the way home from work. He gets approached by Yu Sanga. From the way I understand it, Sang is the first syllable of her name and Ah's the second, so it's kind of weird, hard to pronounce for me, but I'm trying my best. And also, I've kind of gotten in the habit of saying surname first, like Kim Dokja or Yu Sang-ah, just because it sounds more natural. Sounds more natural surname first to me. It just flows better, because like some of the names, when you put the surname afterward, they get kind of weird to say. But Yu Sang-ah is from HR, the most popular girl at work, and the finance team assistant manager. So I'm like, okay, finance team assistant manager, HR, is that like the same for wherever he works? I was like, that seems a little different. But she's taking the train because someone stole her bicycle. She's also studying Spanish. She lists off a bunch of her favorite authors and everything, and I don't know if any of that information is going to be important or not. We also, when we see on Dokja's phone, other than TWSA, we see The World After the Apocalypse by Sing Shong, who is, I believe, one of the authors for Omniscient Reader. So I'm like, I think this is probably a meta reference, because there are a lot of meta references that people in the comments have been bringing up during my read-throughs. So I think this is probably just a meta reference to the author and to likely to Omniscient Reader's viewpoint, because it says it has like 169 chapters at the time of like when he's it says that it says that The World After the Apocalypse has 169 chapters. So that makes me think, okay, does that mean that Omniscient Reader's viewpoint, the web novel, was at 169 chapters when the webcomic adaptation started? That makes me think that's what it's a reference to. So yeah, I think it's just a meta reference. Dokja also says that he read TWSA from 8th grade through all of his life struggle, and that he has had no happy moments in life. He says that chapter 1 had 1,200 views, by chapter 10 there were only 20 views, and by chapter 50 there were only 12. And then eventually it's just him reading. Sang-ah, we learn, is getting hired on as a full-time employee while Dokja's contract is running out. We get some shots of Gil-young and his bugs, and there's just this line where Sang-ah is trying to like sort of be polite and nice to Dokja, and he's just like, no, you don't have to put in a good word for me or whatever. We all have our own lives to live. And I'm like, what is that line? That's so weird. I was like, imagine being in a conversation with somebody and you're talking about something and your response to them is, we have our own lives to live. I'm like, that's a weird thing to say, right? I was like, that's kind of awkward, don't you? It's kind of weird. Then we have TLS123 making contact with Dokja and thanking them for allowing them to finish their story, saying that they won a contest, which makes me think, like, was this contest to end the world, to write the apocalypse, whatever? Was the requirement that you're able to finish while maintaining at least one reader, and that's why TLS was able to win, because Dokja was the one who kept reading through all this time? Is that maybe why? But they say that TWSA will become paid content and asks for Dokja's email in order to give him a present. Then the power goes out, the Dokubi is revealed, and they mentioned the 8612th planetary system. So I've been viewing this series kind of as more of a spiritual, magical kind of thing, where I'm like, so is it's I was viewing it more like a kalpa, I'm not 100% on the pronunciation, from like a lot of cultures have them, like I believe Hinduism has them, where it's like all the world ends or whatever, then it's created again, then eventually it ends again, it's created again. And it's different eras like that. I was thinking of it like that, like a kalpa. This is the 8612th time that the universe has been recreated, and now the universe is collapsing, dying again to be rebuilt again. But it might just be Earth. It might straight up just be Earth. It might be more of a sci-fi thing. So at first I was viewing it more of like a spiritual kalpa type thing, where it's like, oh, the universe is being destroyed to be created again by the gods or whatever. And then, I don't know, the more I read, the more I'm like, okay, maybe it's more of a sci-fi thing, because if all the constellations or whatever are like these celestial entities, then it makes me think maybe the 8612th planetary system is just Earth, and Earth is just the one that's being destroyed, and it's just sort of part of a game being held by these really advanced sort of aliens and such. That's why they refer to them as things like humans or Earthlings. That's why they have all of the technology and video game references in how things are run. So I was viewing it as more of a fantasy type thing, but maybe I should be looking at it more of like a sci-fi type thing. So maybe I was looking at it a little bit wrong. From there, though, let's talk about Chapter 2. I have a lot less notes for everything after Chapter 1. So Chapter 2, I love the Dokubi's design. Byung is one of my favorite characters in the series so far. I'm like, 19 chapters in was my most recent read through. And I'm going to be doing reviews of these for each section that we finish. So yeah, I love the Dokubi's design. The Dokubi's just one of my favorite characters. I like him a lot. It speaks its own language at first, and Sangha is like, oh, is it speaking Spanish? And I have more to say on that later. It mentions the language patch, again talking more in video game-ish terms. It drops a guy, just completely kills a guy. It reminds me, because there's one shot of this like little girl being held by their parent or whatever, and it's like, mommy, is that a cartoon? And I'm like, wow, knowing what I know now by the end of this section or whatever, that little kid's dead. I'm like, okay, this random little kid that we see here is dead, just knowing that now. Mr. Han offers money to the Dokubi, and the Dokubi mentions that human money has no macrocosmic value. So again, in the larger scheme of the universe with these godlike celestial beings, human money has no worth. And everything here is sort of judged by coins. Then we start our first main scenario, Prove Your Value, where you have to take down any living organism. And I'm just thinking, shouldn't there be like a janitor out there somewhere? Like, it might be, I think it's adding way too much logic into just something that you should just take at face value. It is, I don't know, take it at face value, but then again later on, Doke just smushes the bug eggs, and they're like, oh yeah, bug eggs totally count, you get coins for that. So I'm like, shouldn't like okay, it says living creature, then do like bacteria count? Like, shouldn't there be a janitor out there somewhere that just like takes Lysol or something, dumps it out, and becomes the strongest guy in the verse? Like, I just racks up millions of kills. It makes me curious. I'm like, if the insect eggs count, then like, where are we drawing the line? But either way, that ends episode 2. So to talk quickly about episode 3, like I said, most of my notes for the other episodes aren't quite as deep as the first one. So starting off episode 3, Sang-ah tries to call the cops, and I'm just like, if this wasn't Korean, this would be the most Karen behavior. This creature shows up, starts trying to say something in another language. Oh, is that Spanish? And then tries to call the cops immediately when things go awry. I'm like, this would be just the most Karen behavior if it wasn't Korean. We get the introduction for Lee Hyun-sung. He's a lieutenant. His little nickname thing is Steel Blade, and he's from Unit 6502. I'm trying to note everything like that because I don't know if it'll be important in the future or not. Maybe we run into somebody or a unit of soldiers and they're like, hey, we're Unit 6502. And it's like, oh, that's the unit he belonged to. So maybe I should know this. But then again, maybe it's never mentioned again and isn't meaningful at all. I have no clue. So I'm noting it just in case. And then this is when Dokja starts getting concerned for the first time, where he's like, hold up. Lee Hyun-sung was a character in TWSA, but he wasn't introduced like this. He doesn't show up in the story until after the first scenario. We see that the president and prime minister are clapped. They are done. And also the time limit is reduced to 10 minutes, and if the first death isn't within 5 minutes, everyone will die. Dokja is still trying to figure out what's going on. He's like, okay, the main character isn't here. We as viewers get to see blood splatter happening in the next train car over. And then we learn that there's also a barrier that prevents people from leaving or exiting the areas they're in for this scenario. So each area is closed and sealed off. If you're in some big open field, what does that mean? Who knows? So there's a barrier to prevent people from leaving. We get to see into Taepung Girls High School and its channel BAY 23515. Don't know if that will be important, but with the different Dokkaebi and how they're running their channels and stuff and how that gets mentioned a few chapters from now, I think it's maybe worth mentioning, maybe worth trying to remember, just in case we run into the Dokkaebi that runs this channel later on or something and it's important somehow. But we have the sole survivor, Lee Ji-ye, and I have no clue if I'm pronouncing that correctly, because like I've mentioned in other videos for this, all the names here are, except like I think Docha's, like he mentions, is kind of a rare, weird name that people always ask about, but most of these names are pretty normal, common Korean names from what I know. But the thing with Korean is that when it's translated into Roman letters, when it's Romanized, it is not always phonetic. I've mentioned this a lot, where like the character for Lee can be read as Lee or Yi or just E. So it becomes difficult. So I'm like, it's spelled G-A in like Roman letters, but I have no idea if that tells me exactly how it should be pronounced. Should it be Ji-ye? No, it should be Ji-ye. I'm just going to go with G-A for now. And I feel like we're going to see her later. I feel like she's going to be important. If we just saw into the high school and we're like, oh, wow, this is meant to show us how serious they are about the game. Unless you kill somebody like this one girl did, you're going to get killed because that's the way the game works. But if we just got that, I would maybe think that. But the fact that we specifically got like the box and everything with Sole Survivor and showing her specific name makes me think, okay, we're probably going to be reintroduced to her later on because we got a specific name and everything, and it would be a good, cool callback to bring the character back in. And so then the audience is like, whoa, they thought about this all the way ahead of time to where this character was in like one of the first chapters. So I do think we're going to see Lee Ji-ye again. And that brings us to the end of episode 3, going into episode 4. Dokja realizes that he was sent a TXT file of TWSA, and after he's confused at all these discrepancies, I kind of try to put those two words together, he starts to figure things out. So we get some explanations of the game, that each person has a special attribute and a skill linked to that attribute. Now we see from characters, like even in this, like from Namun, we see that the characters have more than one skill, but what I gather from this is that they all have a special attribute, like Edgelord, for example, and they have one skill that's tied into this attribute, like Grimdark Awakening is tied into Edgelord, but they can have other individual skills other than that. It's just that whatever their attribute is, they get a skill based on that attribute. And there are also other things with the game later, but we'll get to those when we get to those. I don't want to jump too far ahead on things that aren't in these 7 chapters. So yeah, we learn a little bit about that. Dokja cannot view his own skill and attribute window though. But he learns that his attribute allows him to read things at a faster speed, so he reads through the first chapter of TWSA in less than a minute, and that's when he puts it all together, having refreshed himself on the first chapter. The story of TWSA starts in cabin 3707, but they're in 3807, one cabin away from the main character, which explains why Hyunsung Lee wasn't introduced in the story until after the first scenario. There were only 2 survivors of cabin 3807 in the actual story, which would have been, we know, Hyunsung and Namun would have been the 2 survivors. So in the story, Gil-young would have died, Han would have died, Sang-ah would have died. All of these characters would have died in TWSA. So Han actually tries to stop Namun from killing the old lady, which was a little thing that I wouldn't have really remembered if I hadn't gone back to reread and make this review and everything, which maybe I'm just on the Han defense force a little bit too much here, but I'm like, okay, maybe that's to show us that he's not all that bad a guy, because it could be easy to just make a character who's nothing but obsessed with money, but we add in this little wrinkle of he tried to stop Namun from killing the old lady before anybody else did. So I don't know, maybe that's giving us a little glimpse of Han not being a horrible person, or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. And Dokja says that Namun was the first adapter to the new rules of the new world of TWSA and the Apocalypse. And here's where we get what I always bring up and what I view is arguably the most important thing in the series, and maybe I'm just completely wrong, because maybe the author's really not doing as much with this concept as I feel like could be done. Perhaps maybe they're just not viewing this as important as I'm viewing it. But for me, one of the most important things, possibly the most important thing in this series, is that Dokja acknowledges here, the more he changes things, the more he affects the story, the less that he's going to be able to tell later on. The more that he changes what the story in TWSA is, the less helpful his ability to read TWSA is going to be, because he's going to have completely changed the story. And to me, I view that as one of the most important things in the series, is Dokja having to decide between, do I change things to benefit me or to do what I think is right, at the risk of making things more difficult later on because I've ruined my one special ability that other people don't have. But yeah, either way, that's into chapter 4. Let's talk about chapter 5. So Dokja then was waiting for an explosion to be his chance to jump in and tackle Namun out of the group that was beating the old lady to death. And he uses the explosion from the neighboring cabin to do that. He takes Gil-young's bugs, gives one to him, and then throws the rest after making his speech to the people. Like, you know, hey, do you people want to survive this without having to murder somebody? So he throws them. And one thing I like about this, and what I like in general about Omniscient Reader, is Dokja is constantly questioning himself or critical of his own feelings, critical of his own motives. Like, was I always the kind of person to do this or to feel this way? I like that. And one thing that I like a lot is there seems to be this running thing of, he's the Omniscient Reader. He knows a bit of what's going to happen beforehand. Some of these people who are real people to him for the past 10 years have just been characters. They've been characters in a web novel. And yeah, sorry, it was just hitting me that he said he's been reading for 10 years, but he also said he started reading in 8th grade, but that doesn't really line up that well with his age. But I think that, again, might just either be a Korean thing, or either like it's not supposed to be taken that seriously, that like strictly. Like it might have actually been more than 10 years, but he was just saying, yeah, it took me a decade. Like it's not supposed to be taken as like literal as I was taking it. But yeah, one thing I like a lot is that he's viewed these people as characters for so long. So there's always this thing where it's like, there's almost a detachment with Dokja, where it's like, it would be easy for him to stop seeing people as people, but as characters. It'd be easy for him to compartmentalize and stop thinking of what was happening right now as really what's happening, but as a story, and characters in a story, players on a stage. So he kind of has to keep himself in check. There's like this really, really interesting aspect, I think, to Dokja's character, with him questioning his own motives and actions a lot, and the sort of mental state that he's in throughout this, I think is really, really, really interesting. So we get to see Namun Kim's character profile, something else that Dokja can do now. The character profile, again, I think it's going to be important for me to note all of the character profiles and keep track of people's stats so I can see how they compare to one another, because stats are seemingly important. Dokja uses them to kind of become knife-proof here. So I think it's going to be important to pay attention to these things. But Namun Kim is age 19, doesn't have a constellation, but there are 2 interested in him. His personal attribute is Edgelord. His skills are Exceptional Adaptability level 3, Knife Fighting level 1, and Grimdark Awakening level 1. And his stats, which I guess they're like your Fallout special, but the SSAMs here. Stamina level 3, Strength level 4, Agility level 6, and Mana level 4. He is called the Delusional Demon later on in the story, which is like the steel knife or whatever the Cheonsung Lee was called. And he asks Dokja to team, which is where we're kind of left on a cliffhanger. But then we get back into chapter 6 next. And in chapter 6, we start off, we get a glimpse of the main character in the next car over. Dokja refuses to team with Namun. He says that he declines because he knows Namun's future, and if he didn't know Namun's future, he would team because that would be guaranteed survival. So that's interesting. It makes me wonder, what is it about Namun's future? Does Namun end up sort of taking the group into a tragic path, or is it just because Namun's a crappy person who would have done bad things in the future? It makes you wonder exactly why Dokja was like, yeah, for right now, teaming with Namun would guarantee my survival. But there was something there. There's something there that makes him, and I wonder if we're going to learn later on what it is, that makes, because one thing I really like about Namun is, even in the most recent chapters, we keep getting callbacks to him. He's very, very important, even though he gets taken out of the story very early on in a living role. He's very important to the story as a character whose ideologies and the way that he approaches the system of Omniscient Reader, the end of the world, the way he approaches how to play the game, how it juxtaposes with what Dokja wants to do in terms of how he's playing the game. So I think that's super, super, super important. From there, we have Namun activating Grimdark Awakening. Dokja unlocks Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint level 1, which is basically mind reading. It works, I mentioned in my read-throughs, very similar to, pretty similar to Snow White's ability in Magical Girl Raising Project. It works similar to that one. It's basically mind reading. Also, Dokja is keeping the old lady alive just so that, this is like the pettiest fighting tactic, really. Like, I'm not gonna, like, he's like, I'm not gonna kill Namun, don't know if he can kill Namun, honestly. And he's like, the old lady's gonna die anyway. She isn't killing anybody. Old lady's getting clapped by the system. But he's keeping her alive because if she dies, then if we're viewing these as tests, scenarios, whatever, Namun's gonna pass the scenario, but he's like, I need to protect the lady, not to protect her because she's gonna die anyway. I need to protect her so that Namun doesn't live. Just like, it's so interesting because there are so many times in stories where the main character's like, oh, I have to protect this person, and they're protecting them to protect them, but Dokja's protecting this person not to protect them because they're gonna die anyway. He's protecting them to kill Namun. It's so good. I really like that. Then Dokja crushes the insect eggs for coins, puts 2,700 coins into stamina, which levels his stamina to 10, and he becomes knife-proof, basically, which makes me wonder, is this something where, like, so your stats are super, super important. I'm wondering, are your stats only that important in combat against another person within the game, or do you just become superhuman? Like, if you leveled strength, is that strength determining how much damage you do to another person or a monster within the game in a fight? Or can you just start punching through concrete walls? And with this, with the stamina, it's like, so he's basically knife-proof when attacked by Namun. Is that because of their stat differences? Which, I mean, damn, stamina 10, only level 10 goes nuts. Is it just because that's not that big of a difference between like the strength and stuff of Namun. But either way, he becomes basically knife proof, which makes you think like, so if he like trips and hits his knee, is he immune to hurting his knee? If he falls off a 4-story building, is he good because he's knife proof? Or is like non-combat physics still apply in the same way? So that's just something that has me interested. I'm like, is this only like when it pertains to the game that he's knife proof, or is he just generally, is he like superhumanly tough now, just for the rest of the series? And of course it'll become less effective as other things get to higher level. But even then, if he's knife proof, like, that's pretty good. So the scenario ends and we get the little box saying that there are 5 survivors, and that's where we're cliffhung. So I'll talk about who survived and everything like that in the next section's review. Also, I wanted to mention that it is mentioned here specifically that this is train 3434 to Bulguang, which I am going to keep in memory because I don't know how important all of the different locations are going to be and like who's going to where and when. So I kind of want to keep paying attention to like where. So this was the train to Bulguang. That's where they were going to. Trying to keep that in mind. But yeah, either way, that is all the information that I have on chapters 0 through 6 as of going through. So yeah, like I said, I'll be continuing on the read-throughs as often as possible. Plus, I'll be doing more of these reviews, one on each section of the story as we finish them, which means I'm a little bit behind from where my read-throughs are, so I'll have to do a little to catch up. But yeah, either way, that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it turned out all right. Like I said, I tried to record it once before, but I just didn't like it. I felt like I rushed too much. I feel like I skimmed over too much. I wanted to take my time more in discussing this. So yeah, I guess that's it. One last thing. Before I go into my whole like, comment, subscribe thing at the end, I wanted to say I'm sorry to one of you. One of you posted a comment on the most recent Omniscient Reader, read-through, that you were like, hey, spoiler warning, and then you said some stuff, and I was like, it's a spoiler, I should maybe delete it. But then I realized you said spoiler warning, and you would have to click read more to read the rest of what you said, so I could have just not clicked read more and left it up there. So that's probably what I should have done, but I didn't think about that until after I deleted it. So I just wanted to apologize and say, whoever that was, you did put a spoiler warning, so sorry that I deleted your comment. I just had a lapse in judgment. My brain didn't keep up. After I deleted, I was like, wait, I could have just left it and just not clicked read more. So yeah, sorry, that was my bad. I just wanted to, like, if you came back and saw your comment wasn't there, I just wanted to say sorry about that. That was my fault, my bad. But yeah, either way, gonna hit the intro now. Thank you so much for watching. Like if you did like the video, and comment down there to tell me what you thought of these chapters, what you thought of my first thoughts and reaction. Again, you don't really need to over explain stuff, and not spoiling me would be nice. Because I'm just reviewing this as I go through it. So of course, those of you who are caught up 120 some chapters later are gonna know more than me. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe for much more Omniscient Reader, much more on the channel other than this too. Like I said, we're reading through and reviewing Kubera right now. Going to be doing my best to continue on with Tower of God videos. Just a lot of things. Bunch of manga and anime stuff as well, which I want to make sure I do plenty of, because I've been focusing pretty heavily on the webtoon stuff lately, but I don't want to just do one thing. I want to branch out. I would love to do game stuff too, but I don't really know what to do when it comes to that. So yeah, there's going to be a lot more anime and manga stuff as well as the webtoon stuff. Follow on Twitter if you want. If you want a link to the Discord server, it's free and open for anybody. Just ask me and I can give you a link to it. We can talk there. Anywhere you want to talk to me, whether in the comments or on Twitter or on Discord, I try to answer everybody the best I can all the time. If you want to help support the channel on Patreon to help me to continue to make videos, it would help a lot, and it's patreon.com/Haku of the Tubes, or a link will be in the description. But if you wanted to also support in a different way other than becoming a patron, you could also become a channel member. The memberships, all you got to do is hit join down below the video. Don't know if that works on mobile or not. I don't think it does, but you can hit join down below the video. You can become a channel member. But yeah, you could do either of those things. I always say thank you to those of you who are patrons and channel members. Thank you to the current members and patrons, the chosen regulars, Edgy Zero, Evan Holly, and Remorsefuls, Magical Girl, FR Nono, Cherryton Students, also the Storyteller, and David Langstaff, and Slayer Candidate SG. Thank all of you so much for watching. Thank all of the members and patrons for supporting. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, and I'll see you all next time.